Thanks for tuning in. Please make sure you have the questions that accompany this video. I will be collecting these and going over them with you on Thursday at our library session. So we're going to go over the first part of the lesson plan and then look at the corresponding rubric that aligns. Learning goals in Math Methods 2 will be using the learning indicator. The indicators have that lowercase letter, and for the one lesson you're writing for me, your teacher has already determined what that learning indicator will be. You will be writing this lesson plan on your own, not with your planning partner that's been assigned to the same class. Actually, he or she will have the second learning indicator that's been assigned to that classroom. Your learning objective: what do you want your students to know and be able to do as it pertains to math? Let's look at this sample written by a student. She starts with her condition, followed by audience. Behavior uses a measurable verb, will explain, and then this suggests her method of assessment and the degree of accuracy without error. Notice it's not necessary. Students will explain, future tense. It's not necessary, it's actually implied. Students will be able to explain, taking up more space, not necessarily to include those words. So the preference is condition first, audience, behavior, degree of accuracy. Many times I should see you just take, a key strategy is to just take that learning indicator and tack on that condition and degree of accuracy. Condition, audience, degree of accuracy, because you've got the key elements right there, starting with that verb. Notice a little bit lower here under 1C1, we have more learning indicators, and these come from first grade and third grade. They still deal with measurement, and that's because it shows what came before and what is to come after. We've had a little bit of practice at our learning seminar. If I switch over to the scoring rubric that you'll be able to view online and will later get a hard copy of, let's go over the language that discusses these elements. So first off, the standards are clear. 1F2. So I've asked you to use the standard indicator because it's more specific. And, oops, if you got dizzy there, the 1Cs deal with our learning objectives. So we'll just examine the top here. The objectives, or in this case, you may just be writing one for a shorter one-day math lesson. Does it have high expectations and important learning for math? Is it connected to a sequence of learning? Well, yes, because in the example we looked at how it was a second grade learning indicator that was connected to first grade and third grade learning. Does it have rigor? Is it important? Well, yes, because it's straight from the Nebraska standards. Is the instructional objective written in a clear format? Yes. Putting that condition first often prevents it from having kind of being too wordy, having less important non-measurable words included. So keep that in mind. And then it does suggest viable methods of assessment. When we tack on that degree of accuracy at the end, the sample one had without error, which is a good goal when students are asked one question and they're writing an exit ticket pertaining, in this case, the measurable verb was will explain, so the explanation is supposed to be without error. And this particular candidate down in the criteria explains in the post-assessment what the scoring guidelines are. So I would be able to use her information and understand what a student performing at the without error level would look like. We won't be doing 1C4 since the diverse learners we're not sure about who the students in the class are just yet. Filling out 1A1, both the essential question and important vocabulary shows your content knowledge. So you might have to do a little bit of digging here. Notice the essential question doesn't need to have a lot of words. It should be put in the context of, could your students answer this or demonstrate it in the debrief or the end part of the lesson? Might even be something that when you write it here in this backward design, you could also copy it and paste it in the actual sequence or teaching part. Similar to the vocabulary, what are the important words associated with your story? You'll find these a lot of information here in the planning resources that you'll be using, as well as anticipating and thinking about words that are part of the learning indicator as well as involved in the story. We look at the rubric for 1A1. Do you display solid knowledge of the important concepts? So we just looked at the essential question and the vocabulary. So solid, or do you show familiarity? And that's just one portion. I also like to look holistically at the content knowledge because there are not to be any errors. Similar, do your plans reflect how those prerequisite skills that were talked about, like for a second grade, what came in first grade as shown by the learning indicators for measurement, how those will play a part or feed into what students are learning in second grade. So while you lack the actual experience of teaching, really being mindful and taking time to examine high quality, reputable materials such as those we're set forth to examine at the library will help you make the most of looking for relationships among the prerequisites and the new skill. If we examine the rest of what occurs in part 1 of planning the lesson, I give you permission to skip 1B1, 1B4, 1B5 because this is information that we won't have. 1A2 as well because we may decide to give a pre-assessment. The ongoing formative assessment you cannot skip. I'd like you to apply learning from Chapter 5. Will you ask questions? Will you do an observation using maybe a form from Chapter 5? We're going to put this in the context of teaching a small group of approximately 1/3 of your class or 8 students. I would say for the 2 of you that do not have a class partner, you should think of teaching half of the class. Pretend that your classroom teacher has half and you have half. So maybe a few more students, 12. But is there a tool that you would use for observation if you say that you're observing? If you're going to do questions, whatever you write here, it's good to make sure that that is down below in the sequence as well. The post-assessment with an exit ticket, you share what the question will be and then the criteria. So if it's without error, then I can have my little rubric planned out. And then for materials, this one doesn't necessarily model, like if I get to the school and I use this as a checklist, do I really have everything? Do I know which materials should be organized for students and which materials for me? So I might recommend 2 other strategies. One strategy would be to either put in a table and have one column be teacher materials. What do I need to teach? And then what do my students need? The other organization method that was actually used by some students was by part. So they organized it by saying, for the introduction, these 2 supplies or materials are needed. When we get to core, these 5 materials are needed. And then when we get to the debrief, these are the materials that are needed. After you have your materials listed, that's kind of the easy part, but do look at the expectations for attaching the materials or including a clear picture, because it's hard for me to evaluate things I cannot see. What is the source? So I like to know that it comes from a reputable source. You want to make sure when we're at the library you are scanning in the materials or using loose change and making copies. When you justify, think of research-informed strategies for math. And a big one for materials is that concrete to pictorial to abstract, or the CPA progression. So I want you to be thinking about that as you justify the materials that are used up above. And according to my rubric, my materials, all of the materials should be suitable for my students, aligned to the objectives, and designed to engage students. So if I don't justify that they're designed to engage, I'm going to be scored lower. So this is the language of the rubric. So that it comes out to be our 25 points. You may notice these numbers are not consistent with the handout that I provide, but today my intent is to show you the language of the rubric. The other parts we will talk about when we put together the lesson sequence that matches my picture book, Spaghetti and Meatballs for All.